Everybody, how's it going? Got a little bit different setting for you today. Today we're out here at our zombie paintball attraction, also our Camp Blood attraction. Both of them are fall Halloween attractions, and hopefully, a little over a month, we'll see long lines of people out here every weekend at night. So we've been doing some work on this weekend. Just to clear up, I'm not the actual owner of the Zombie Trail Paintball or Camp Blood. I'm just on the land, and I help out here wherever I can. We've also got our corn maze. Watch our previous videos. I've shown us planting it and also cutting the corn maze. Just give you a little quick peek of it. You can tell, corn's looking good. Some of the tallest corn I've grown. Just see if I can give you a little bit of height comparison. I'm 6'2" tall, and I'm still reaching all the way up. I'm still several feet from the tassel. We got to come in here and mow it again, but you can imagine in the daylight, this is pretty challenging. At dark, it's really hard. We got about 3.5 acres of corn maze here, and looking really good. Should be a good attraction this fall. So if you want to learn more about this attraction, go to zombietrailpaintball.com. And if you're anywhere close to West Tennessee, you want something fun to do for the whole family on this weekend, all through the month of October, come by and see us. There's a good chance I'll be out here, at least at some point, whenever I get off the combine or cotton picker. All right, out here we're in front of the Camp Blood part. This is the actual haunted house part. We got our entrance here, got our exit over here, and it goes way back in the woods. We got a total of 7 different haunted cabins before you go through. Now this right here is not a family-friendly event. This is a very scary, very aggressive haunted attraction. So if you don't like scary stuff, you probably won't stick to the other side of the shed where the Zombie Trail Paintball is. So that's definitely family-friendly. The corn maze is family-friendly. This is for those of y'all that want to get scared. Now we haven't 100% decide if we're going to open this side or not. It was closed last year due to COVID, and we were definitely going to plan to open it this year, but the recent spread of the Delta variant could be putting that on hold. We're not so much concerned for the customers. They know what they're getting into, enter their own risk, but we're worried about potentially carriers that are customers coming through and getting the workers sick, because this is definitely up close, personal, and in your face. Definitely not social distancing out here. So hopefully here in the next week or so we'll make a decision if we're going to proceed with this or not. But Zombie Trail Paintball is definitely going to be open. You want something fun this weekend, come by and see us. Let's get to the questions here. All right, to get to the questions, we're going to swap things up just a little bit more than what we normally done on our previous videos. Normally I've gone in the order that the questions were asked on previous videos, but here in the last couple of days, 2 viewers have asked questions that I really think need to be answered and cleared up. I think they're that important. One of them has to do with comments I've made in previous videos. We'll get that cleared up. And then another one is out there, something, if you're on social media, you watch the news, you probably see a lot of stuff like this. So I want to get those questions cleared up. But the first question is from Buckeye Farm Boy. He asked me, how did I overbook 25,000 bushels of soybeans last year? That's like 500 acres worth. Well, Buckeye, I didn't actually overbook 25,000 bushels of soybeans last year. All right, just to give you a quick overview on, for those of you that don't know how we market grain, typically any granary here in the country, you have 3 base options on contracting grain. You can do a flat price contract, whereas you take the futures price and the basis and add them together, and that's what you get. The basis is what that granary is offering, either above or below the futures price for that delivery period. Then you can also do what we call a basis contract, whereas you lock in just the basis at that time, and then you lock in the futures at another point in time. You can also do a hedge to arrive contract, which is the opposite. You lock in the futures price at that time, but then you lock in the basis at another time. It's generally not that common where you have a high futures price and a high basis price. So a lot of times, we'll lock in one or the other when one gets to the point that we want it at, and then we'll lock in the second later. Now, a lot of other granaries have other different types of contracts, and they can vary from granary to granary. The one that we did with Bunge is what they call a turbo contract. It's pretty similar to a max min contract that you might find at other granaries. Whereas you got a futures price, and then if you do this type contract, you get the futures price plus a premium, whatever premium that the granary is offering above the futures price. And what they do is to say, I'm booking 5,000 bushels of soybeans right now for January delivery. It's August right now, I'm going to deliver them in January. They take that 5,000 bushels, they figure out how many trading days are between now and January, and they divide it, and you're contracting that many, you're contracting so many bushels of grain every single day until the contract closes out. At that time that you do the contract, you also set what they call a knockout price below the futures price. It could be whatever you wanted to set it at, and as long as the futures price never drops below that knockout price, you accumulate your total number of bushels over the trading period. However, if the futures price ever falls below that knockout price, the only thing you've got contracted is the bushels you accumulated from the time you did the contract until the time that it got knocked out. Now, if the futures price never drops below the knockout price, eventually you're going to accumulate all the bushels in that contract whenever the contract closes out in January. But then on the flip side, and here's a catch, this is what came back to bite me, is that at the time that the contract closes out in January, if the futures price is above what your price was, the contract doubles on you. So instead of having 5,000 bushels of soybeans contracted, you then got 10,000 bushels of soybeans contracted. So what happened to me last year is that we had what I thought was a pretty promising price. I think soybeans got up to $9.25, whereas for the last 3 or 4 years they've been hovering in that mid to high $8 range, maybe up close to $9. Well, the futures price got up to about $9.25, and then they were going to offer me a 50-cent premium to do a turbo contract, which would have gotten me at $9.75 a bushel, which at that time, I mean, I was jumping up for joy. I thought that was a great price. We did 25,000 bushels of soybeans at $9.25 plus the 50-cent premium. What I did not foresee, and certainly didn't expect, because it very rarely happens, is that whenever harvest hit, they're around August, September, all commodity prices started going up. They started going up to levels that we hadn't seen in 4 or 5 years. So my contract never got knocked out because the prices were going up, they weren't going down. So when January rolled around, the futures price was about, I think the futures price was about $12.75 or so. So my contract doubled. Instead of having 25,000 bushels of beans at $9.75 contracted, I then had 50,000 bushels of beans at $9.75 contracted. Well, I didn't have enough production to fill that 25,000 bushels of beans, just my original contract. So at that point, I had 2 options. I could either buy out of that contract, and and it would have cost me money, because the difference in what I had contracted and the futures price at that point was about $3 a bushel. So 25,000 bushels of soybeans at $3 a bushel cost me about $75,000. I really didn't have that. So the other option was I could roll that contract over to the next year, 2021. Well, the difference in January 2020 futures and January 2021 futures was about $2.25 at that point. So you guys subtract the $2.25 from the $9.75, which gives me about $7.50 soybeans. That's what I'm contracted to deliver this year. No, in hindsight, that wasn't the right move. What I should have done is just bit the bullet, bought out that contract for $3 or so a bushel, been out $75,000, and then soybeans continued to get to climb. I think they got somewhere in the $15 a bushel range, and I could have picked up a lot of extra money. I didn't know that was going to happen. I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen in the futures market. I mean, when you've been dealing with $8-9 bushel beans for 4 or 5 years, you don't expect that 6 months later, beans are going to be, almost double that. You just don't expect it. Not saying that it hadn't happened before, but that's just not what you expect. So that's how I've got, 25,000 bushels of beans at around $7.50 locked in. At that time, I did buy a call option to try and increase some of that money, and I think ultimately we wound up getting about 40 cents out of that call option before I exited that position. So now we're up to about $7.90 a bushel, and when I lock in the basis, we'll probably get around a 30-cent basis. I'll probably be in the $8.20 range is what we'll actually sell that 25,000 bushels of soybeans for. So that's just in the past, those turbo contracts have worked out really well with me. This is one time where it really came back to bite me in the butt. So hopefully that clears it up a little bit. I don't make it a habit of way overbooking my expected production, because it can really come back to bite you. But in that one time, that contract doubling up, it really hurt, and I'm gonna pay the price for it this fall. So, but it looks like we got a really strong soybean crop. So we'll make that 25,000 bushels. We should have quite a few bushels above 25,000 that we can sell at the current futures price, which right now $13 and a half a bushel, and we'll be able to bring our average soybean price on up to make it less painful. So anyway, hope that answers your question. Hope that clears that up. The second question today is from James Morrison. He says, there are claims out there that say what farmers are spraying is detrimental to people, or pretty much detrimental to everything. What's my opinion? Well, James, to answer your question, you can look at this several different ways. The way that I prefer to look at it is, you look at the world's population, it's almost 8 billion people. 8 billion people that have to eat every day. That's a lot of food. And if you look at land, well, they're not making any more farmland. In fact, we're losing farmland every year to urbanization. And you're not going to feed 8 billion people with organic farming. I'm sorry. You're just not going to feed 8 billion people with organic farming, doing everything naturally. You do need some science out there. Now, I'm not an advocate of applying pesticides, willy-nilly. There's science out there that shows when's the most cost-effective, the best time to apply pesticides, whether it be herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, or whatnot. You don't want to apply anything needlessly. I mean, for one thing, all these pesticides, they're not cheap. They're expensive. They can range anywhere from $2 an acre to over $20 an acre, depending on what you're applying, how much you're applying, and what you're trying to control. And even thinking back to organic farming is not pesticide free. I mean, there's pesticides out there. They might be natural pesticides, they might be natural toxins, but they're still applied to the crop. That doesn't mean that, if you buy something organic, that doesn't mean that no chemicals or pesticides have been applied to it. It just means that they're not synthetic pesticides. And actually, a lot of those organic pesticides can actually be much more toxic than what the synthetic ones that we're using. In recent years, science has allowed pesticides to be developed that more specifically target a specific pest that you're trying to control, instead of wiping out everything like a lot of old insecticides did. A lot of these insecticides now, will only target a certain group of bugs while not harming others. Another reason that I believe pesticides is necessary is that pesticides have allowed for the use of no-till, which is saving our most important natural resource, the soil. Anytime you plow, you're greatly increasing the potential for erosion of the soil. And once the soil's gone, it's gone. And we need topsoil in order to grow crops. You don't grow crops very well on subsoil. Now, erosion is going to happen no matter what form of farming is used. I mean, look at the mountain ranges. Over millions of years, their height decreases because they're being eroded down. Erosion is a natural process. However, tilling the soil greatly increases the rate of erosion by loosening the soil, and it's now being subject to water carrying the soil off or wind carrying the soil off. Now, if you're active on social media, you watch the news, I mean, you probably see a bunch of ads out there by radical groups claiming that farmers drench their crops in pesticides. Farmers use pesticides they call Parkinson's, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. You know, those are a lot of the popular ones. We don't drench our crops in anything. I mean, when we spray a solution of 15 gallons per acre. We think that gives us good coverage. That's the chemical, water, and everything. Total is 15 gallons per acre. The heaviest pesticides that we apply are generally herbicides. They can be, like your glyphosates, your paraquats. We apply those at a rate of 32 ounces per acre. That's 32 fluid ounces spread out over 43,560 square feet. The rest of what's in that 15 gallons per acre is adjuvants and water. So we're not drenching our crops in anything. We apply dry pesticides. The one that we use most of in greatest concentrations is acephate. And generally we don't apply over 3/4 of a pound of acephate over 1 acre. A lot of our other pesticides we use are extremely low use. You know, a lot of the neonicotinoids that we use, we're only applying 1.5 ounces, 2 ounces, 2.5 ounces over 43,560 square feet. We're using extremely low rates. So, I mean, to feed everybody, we need science. We need some modern stuff. You can't do everything organically. You can't do everything naturally. Yeah, people can farm that way, but then on the flip side, there's going to be a lot of people starve. And they might not starve because the food's not available. They might starve because the food prices have drastically gone up. You think about supply and demand. We have, generally speaking, across the world, except for, some third world countries, we have relatively low food costs. As a part of our total income, our food costs are generally fairly low, and food is readily available everywhere. I mean, you go to grocery stores, I mean, they're stocked with everything. We take pesticides out of the equation, food's not going to be near as readily available. There'll still be some out there, but the cost on it's going to be so much higher because of supply and demand. So you could also have people starving because they simply can't afford to eat. So my thoughts are we need now, and we'll need these pesticides even more in the future, because our land area that we're actually able to farm is decreasing every year. The weather seems like it's getting a little bit more extreme. We're seeing more losses from the weather every year. So we've got to produce more food on smaller acreages of land. And we're going to need maximum production in order to feed everybody. And we're not going to be able to do that completely naturally or organically. Now, I do believe in implementing natural and organic practices where it makes sense, because I believe that's a better way. If I can control a weed with cover crops, I'd much rather do that as opposed to controlling a weed strictly with chemicals. But chemicals, pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, they do play a role, and they do have their part in the big picture and will be needed even more in the coming future. So hope that clears that up. One other thing I want to throw out, when you see these ads on Facebook, TikTok, or wherever that says, these chemicals cause Parkinson's disease, these chemicals cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, there's been countless scientific studies that prove that they don't. These ads are based upon findings by a jury, and a jury are not scientists. They're believing a lot of sensationalized testimony. We've been handling both glyphosate and paraquat for years and years. Now, granted, paraquat is a toxic chemical in its concentrated form. We don't apply its concentrated form out in the field, but when we're handling it right out of the jug, it's in its concentrated form, and we have to wear the appropriate PPE, personal protective equipment. And if we don't do that, then yes, there could be toxic effects to us if it gets on our skin or if we ingest it. Some of the chemicals we apply are dangerous. But more and more every year, the chemicals that we're using that are being developed are safer for both us and they're safer for the environment. So just keep that in mind when you see a lot of this sensationalized stuff on social media or the news. All right, now we're going to get back to the original order of questions. I just thought it was very important that I get those questions out of the way because they were very good questions, and the correct information needs to get out there. All right, next question is from Terrinfro 1975. And he asks, what has happened to crop rotation? Farmers around here are just growing corn or cotton all the time. Looks like they're throwing soil management out the window. Well, Terrinfro, a majority of farmers, at least in this area, still practice at least some form of crop rotation. Maybe some of them aren't as strict about their rotation as I am, but a lot of farmers still rotate their crops because, I mean, it's a scientific fact that you plant the same crop on the same piece of land year after year after year, you're not going to hit the top yields that are possible as if you rotate. Because for one thing, you're growing the same crop that has the same pathogens growing in the residue from the old crop that had a lot of those pathogens. You know, you got a better environment for disease if you're growing the same crop on the same piece of soil year after year after year. You also got the same pest, potentially, that can build up in your soil year after year after year. Whereas if you rotate your crops, you have the chance to break that cycle of disease and pest. You know, and that's something we believe very strictly in. We very rarely will plant the same crop on the same piece of land in subsequent years. I mean, the yield benefits of rotating your crops are just too great. Now, that being said, you know, not all crops make the same amount of revenue. You know, if a farmer decides not to rotate for a year, it could be because he's chasing greater revenue. You know, if there's a big discrepancy between income potential from soybeans and corn, you know, a farmer might decide to plant 2 years of corn because the chance of revenue, even when you take the yield penalty, is so much greater. So I don't necessarily think it's a good practice long term. I can understand, you know, say if the farmer's at the end of his career, nobody's going to be taking over the farm. I can understand him going for maximum revenue to support him in his retirement because he's not concerned about the long-term effects. He's wanting to get as much income as he can right then. However, if you're planning on being around for next year or a few years after, I think it's kind of short-sighted in order to not rotate because, yeah, you might be chasing profits this year, but next year you could be hurting your profits because you haven't rotated your ground. You know, what if next year, what if the difference between corn income and soybean income is even greater? Well, you know, now you've had corn on the same piece of ground 2 years in a row. Were you going to put it on 3 years in a row? That's that much more carbon that's got to be decomposed, that much more nitrogen that's going to be tied up, could be that much more disease in the residue. You could really be suffering, you could really be hurting your yields, you know, 3 years down the road. Whereas if you rotate, you know, you would be back into the natural order of, you know, having corn on that ground in that third year and maximizing your revenue then. Also, I'm a big believer of you don't put all your eggs in one basket. My opinion is you don't ever chase one crop in a given year because you don't know what the weather's going to be like. Yes, on paper in January or February when you're making these decisions, yeah, corn might look a lot better than soybeans, or cotton might look a lot better than corn or whatnot. But if you don't have a good growing season that year, your cotton or your corn, whatever you plant, could fall flat on its face, and the crop you decided not to plant, it could have a good growing season. Because, you know, there's a popular saying here in West Tennessee, it's almost impossible to have both an outstanding cotton crop and an outstanding corn crop in the same year because each of those crops has its own conditions that it's most favorable for. Generally, what makes a good cotton yield is going to hurt a corn yield, and vice versa. So, you know, and this has happened to us quite a few times. Something might look good on paper in January or February, but come at the end of the growing season, things look a lot different because maybe the weather didn't pan out the way you thought, or maybe the prices turned out different than what you thought. Basically, the short answer to your question is that most farmers still rotate at least to some degree. However, there are pockets where, the monocrop is practiced. In this area 20 years ago, just about all you saw was cotton. You saw a little bit of corn, you saw a little bit of beans, you saw a little bit of wheat, but it was primarily cotton. On our farm, we monocrop cotton for 130 years or 120 years. And I mean, our yields showed that we monocropped it. Our soil showed that we monocropped it. It wasn't good. And then on the other hand, in some areas of the country, farmers might not have the infrastructure to be able to grow a diverse set of crops. They might not have a cotton gin, or a cotton gin might be too far off, which would preclude them being able to grow cotton. Or they might not have the grain infrastructure in order to grow a lot of corn. They might not have the granaries. They might not have their own grain bin system. So there could be a lot of reasons why farmers don't rotate. But I'd say in general, farmers will get away from their rotation in order to chase profit in an obvious year to where one crop is obviously more profitable than another crop. So, I hope it kind of answers your question. All right, next question, and probably the last question, because we've had some pretty extensive answers here, is from Jerry Whittington. He says, I noticed you run two different guidance systems, one being John Deere on the sprayer and cotton picker, the ones on the tractors being what he's assuming Trimble or Ag Leader. My question is how you get all of your mapping and yield data to communicate on two different systems. I was told around here that you have to do one or the other, basically being all John Deere or all Trimble. Well, Jerry, what you've been told is kind of correct, but it's also kind of not correct. We don't need our equipment to communicate with each other because we've only got one sprayer, only got one harvester. And we're not set up to for our equipment to communicate from one another. Say a sprayer sprays this part of the field and another sprayer sprays this part of the field, and the data show up on each of their monitors. When you're doing something like that, you really do need the same brand of technology on both of those pieces of equipment for them to be able to talk to each other, and one person can see what the other sprayed, so you don't overlap your application. However, when it comes to utilizing all that data, you don't need the same brand. As I mentioned in a previous question, we use Ag Studio as our software that imports all of the data and links it up with our cost, the data applied, and it keeps all of our information in one software. It's able to take the different data formats from your different technologies and bring it all into one place and aggregate it and link it up to make it nice and concise and usable for myself. And also when I'm creating any kind of prescriptions that I'm writing, I'm also able to export it in whatever format that various monitors requires, whether it be John Deere or Trimble or whatnot. Now, ultimately, if we ran strictly all John Deere or all Trimble, which, your CNH, your New Holland, your Case IH, all of that is basically Trimble hardware. If we were to use one or the other, our life would be simpler because each monitor that we have has a different way of accomplishing the same thing. It's got different menu structures, the way it saves stuff, the way it's set up and everything. It's got it's got different structures, and it would be easier for us if we had the same if we would have the same technology on each piece of equipment. But we don't, because what we buy, we don't care what color it is. We want to buy the best machine for the job. Right now, I think John Deere's got some of the best sprayers. John Deere's definitely got the best cotton picker. We're really fond of the New Holland tractors. I don't necessarily think that they're better than Case IH or John Deere. They're practically the same as Case IH, but they come at a little bit cheaper cost, especially compared to John Deere. So, we get tractors that do the right job, and I think Case IH has the best combine out there right now. A lot of people disagree with me. That's my opinion. All these come with their own brand of technology, or if I wanted to, I could add a third-party technology. There's technology companies out there that make monitors that can be retrofitted on different pieces of equipment. But generally, what we find that comes standard on the equipment is good enough for our purposes. So anyway, I kind of hope that kind of roundabout way answers your question. You know, basically what you basically need in order to be able to utilize these different technologies is you need software that can read the data from the different technologies and put it in a nice, concise form that you can actually use. That's the bottom line of all of it. So anyway, hope that answers your question. Well, guys, it's mid-August, middle of the day, humid, hot and sweaty, so we're going to end it right here. I think we definitely got at least another 25 minutes or so. But anyway, guys, appreciate all the questions, appreciate all the comments. Be sure to keep them coming. You know, I still got plenty of content to go through, but I always like getting more content in. So any questions you got about us personally, our farm, something you see in your neighborhood, something you see on the news, whatnot, ask the question. I'll do my best to answer it. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.